In this step, let's talk about IAM and some of the best practices related to IAM. What is IAM? IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. We are creating some powerful resources in AWS, and you need to control access to them. You need to identify the user and you need to control the access to the resources. IAM is responsible for authentication and authorization. Authentication is it the right user? Authorization is, does the user have the right access? In the previous step, we created our AWS account. And while creating our AWS account, we created a root user. The root user credentials are the email address which we used to create the AWS account and the password which we assigned to it while we were creating the account. The important thing to remember is that the root user has absolute power. Anybody who has access to your root user credentials can do anything they want with your AWS account. And that's the reason why it is recommended not to use the root user for day-to-day activities. The best practice is to create another IAM user and use the IAM user for regular day-to-day activities. So what we'll do in this step is to create a IAM group. You might have thousands of IAM users. You don't want to manage permissions for them individually. That's where we would create a group, a IAM group. The group which we'll create is called developers. And we'll create a IAM group with the right access. And after that, we would create a IAM user. So we'll create a IAM user in 28minutes_dev, and we would make it part of the IAM group developers. And later on in the course, we'll be making use of this IAM user to do all our activities instead of making use of the root account. Let's get started with step 1, which is to create an IAM group. Before we'll be able to create an IAM group, we will need to log in into AWS Management Console. If you do a Google for AWS Management Console login, one of the first search results should be AWS Management Console. You can click that. And I would want to go ahead and log back in. This is where you can enter your root user. So we are choosing root user in here, and I'm entering my root user email address. What I would recommend you to do is to enter your root user email address and click next. Once I click next, I'll be taken to the next page where I can enter my root user password. I've entered my password and I would say sign in. And this would take me to the home page of AWS Management Console. There are a wide variety of things that you can do in the AWS Management Console. If you want to see the list of all the services in AWS, you can click the view all services in here. So this would show actually a list of services in AWS. You can also get to this by clicking services. So over here, if you go to services, you can also see the list of services which are present under different categories in AWS. We'll explore AWS Management Console as we go further in this course. For now, what we want to do is to create an IAM group, developers. So what we'll do is to search for IAM in here. IAM stands for Identity and Access Management. It helps you to manage access to AWS resources. So let's go ahead and click IAM. In IAM, you can create users, you can create groups, and you can manage permissions for them. What I want to do is to create a group or a user group. So let's go ahead and click user groups, and you can say create group. I'd want to give the name developers to this group, and I can attach the permissions in here. Typically, you'd want to restrict the amount of permissions that you would give to your IAM users. But what we would do during this course is we'll be using the IAM user that we are creating to perform actions against all the AWS resources. And that's the reason why I would give him administrator access. You can go into the permissions and type in administrator. Make sure that you get the spelling right. It's ADMINISTRATOR. You can type it in and press enter. And then you should see something called administrator access. What you need to do is to check the checkbox which is right beside administrator access. So we are creating a developers group with administrator access. And I would now go ahead and say create group. So we now have a developers group created. We don't have any users that are assigned to this group. Let's now create a user. Let's go to users in here, and I would say add users. The name of the user I would want to create is in28minutes_dev. So I will use username in28minutes_dev. You can see that there are two types of accesses that you can provide. One is programmatic access and the other one is AWS Management Console access. What we are making use of right now is the AWS Management Console. The way we can access AWS Management Console is by typing in a username and a password. This is what typical users would do. Use a username and password and use the AWS Management Console. However, if you're writing any programs, in that kind of scenario, you can make use of programmatic access. That's where you'll also create an access key. Let's not worry about access keys for now. For now, let's focus on just creating a password. So I'll check this up. We want to create a password. What I would choose to do is to create a custom password. I would go ahead and enter my password. Because I'm entering my password in here, I'll uncheck this. I don't want the user to create a new password again at sign in. Now I can go ahead and click next, where I can assign permissions for the user. So let's go ahead and click next. There are a number of ways you can give permissions to the user we have created. You can add user to a group, or you can copy permissions from an existing user, or you can directly attach permissions with the user. The recommended way always is to add user to a group. The group has the right permissions. The developers group has the administrator access. And to give access to our user, what we would do is we would assign him to the developers group. So I'll check this checkbox and I would say next. On the next page, I'll click next again and we can review the details in here. Username is in28minutes_dev. We would want to give AWS Management Console access. We have configured our own password and we are assigning him to the group developers. That looks cool. So let's go ahead and create a user. Awesome. The user is now created and we can now use this user to sign in. So now if I go in and type in IAM and go over to the Identity and Access Management Service, you'd be able to go over to user group. You'll be seeing that there is one user group and one user that we have created. Now we want to log in with this specific user that we have created. So we now have two users. One is the root user and the other one is the IAM user that we have created. Right now we are logged in with the root user. What we want to do is to log in with the IAM user. If you want to log in with the IAM user, the URL is a little different. The URL that you need to make use of to log in with the IAM user is the one which you are seeing in here. So what I would recommend you to do is to copy this URL and bookmark it as well. So what I'll do now is I would open up a new tab and I would paste this URL in. I'll go in here and now I would use the IAM user that I have created. So the IAM user that I have created is in28minutes_dev. I'll type in the password. We are going to frequently use this account. So I'll say remember this account and I would go ahead and say sign in. And now on the top right hand corner, you should see in28minutes_dev. So we are now logged in with the IAM user. Let's quickly summarize what we have done until now. When we created our AWS account, we made use of our email address and we provided a password. Those credentials are what are called root user credentials. One of the AWS best practices is to not use root user for your day-to-day activities. And that's the reason why we have created our own IAM user. We saw that the URL that we would need to use with an IAM user is a little different. So the recommendation is to go ahead and bookmark that URL. And from now on, we'll use that URL and we'll use the IAM user to log in into our AWS account and perform our operations. I'm sure you're having a wonderful time and I'll see you in the next step.